Welcome to the Fit Strong Women Over 50 podcast, episode number 197.
Hi, I'm Maria. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, and I'm Chris. Maria and I are your hosts for this podcast, and I am one of the founders of the Becoming Ellie community. In case you're wondering, we decided to name the community Becoming Ellie because Ellie was the Norse goddess of aging who beat Thor in a wrestling match. And we thought, hey, we want to be more like Ellie, fit and strong as we age.
You can find out more about Becoming Ellie community and this podcast at our website, becomingellie.com. And Ellie is spelled E-L-L-I.
Be sure to sign up for our newsletter while you're there, and that way you'll know about new episodes and everything else that's new with us. So recently, I listened to a podcast that a friend told me about. It was on NPR called How to Be a Super Ager, and it's not your genes. It was a talk by a cardiologist and scientist Eric Topol about the science and the myths of longevity and anti-aging.
Yeah, and after you mentioned listening to this, I checked it out as well. He had a lot of good points about aging. He was trying to identify genetic information about people who were healthy into old age, but realized that it actually had more to do with the choices we make. He covered a lot of topics, and some were probably better suited to a
Yeah.
physician to discuss. But Chris and I thought we would take some time to talk about some of the areas we thought were interesting.
Yes. And so to start, they studied 1,400 participants who are over 80, and they're called the welderly. No cancer, no heart disease, no Alzheimer's. And that's compared or versus to the elderly, folks that were unable to avoid the big three by age 65. So interesting things, it took them 7 years to find 1,400 welderly. And one key aspect of being a welderly is keeping your immune system intact to help avoid the big three. They also found that genes are not as important as lifestyle, which I'm thinking, great, like lifestyle is something you can do something about, right?
Exactly.
And something that we've covered on this podcast before is a focus on your health span, not your lifespan, but your health span. So to increase health span versus lifespan, you can do that by 7 to 10 years of being more healthy with the new healthy aging information. Kind of reminds me of episode 175 from Sally Duplantier. Better choices for better health span. And some of you may get her newsletter or have listened to her. She has Wellness Wednesdays, too, that she invites people to a Zoom talk.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because he talked about Lifestyle Plus. And these are things that many past guests on the podcast and you and Jill have discussed. And Lifestyle Plus really focuses on the importance of sleep, which is always a focus for us. And a lot of people talk about it, but it's not always so easy to accomplish. And then, of course, good nutrition. And I know in episode 180, you and Jill discussed the Mediterranean diet and also the Dash and Mind diets. Plus, so many of the past guests have shared tips on this. So those are always good to go back and review. And of course, exercise. One of the things we really focus on being fit. And that includes balance, resistance and strength training, and aerobics. And again, if you go and search on the Becoming Ellie website, it will bring up blog posts and podcast episodes about all aspects for staying fit. One thing he brought up was short movement breaks, which I have a desk job. So I think about that during the day. But one of the things he brought up was doing that in the evening, like when you're reading or watching television. They did some research that really shows it can improve your sleep, improve your mood and your glucose levels. And people reported that they felt better. And like I said, I always think about that during the day, but I have to admit, sometimes in the evenings, I just kind of plunk down and don't think about taking some movement breaks.
Right.
Another part is social engagement and connection. And that made me think about Mary Beth Albright. She was in episode 127. She's a journalist who wrote the book Eat and Flourish. And after I listened to that episode, I bought the book and I really liked it. And one of the things she talked about was that you should think about eating with someone else on a regular basis because it's actually associated with better health outcomes. And then lastly is getting out in nature. And I know that's one thing that I really love to do. I know it's not always easy for some people, depending on where they live, but I just feel like it's so important.
I have to agree with you. Maria, I love getting out in nature. It's good for not just physical health, but mental health too. There's something about the birds and the trees and the sunshine. I find it restores my soul.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
Some other things he talked about in this podcast was cellular health. And I have to admit, cellular health is a hard concept for me to understand because I am not very techie. But, he, of course, talked about vaccines and medicines and treating inflammation, avoiding inflammation, and keeping your immune system intact. But during this section, the part that I found extremely interesting was the Shingrix vaccine. I think I'm saying that right. It's a double dose vaccine for avoiding shingles. And I was just so surprised to find out that they have done all these studies and found out that it also protects against Alzheimer's. And that one was amazing. I really had to check that out, and I did do a lot of searching about that, and that's a real big one that I haven't heard a lot about, and I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this podcast, you know?
I agree. I found that really interesting. And, you know, also personally, I know I had gotten that a couple of years ago. So I was kind of glad.
Me
So,
too. I was like, "Oh, good. I didn't even realize I was doing something that good." And then he
exactly.
brought up Repatha over taking a statin. For those of you that have high cholesterol and have struggled with not wanting to take a statin for various reasons, Repatha is an alternative to that, and it's basically like an EpiPen. You take it in your thigh every 2 weeks. And let's see, the other thing he talked about, well, I can definitely relate to this, the importance of sleep. And man, we know that getting a good night's sleep and doing all those things to get restful sleep is so important to your health and, your mood and all of those things. He mentioned artificial intelligence that helps with medical diagnostic reviews. And I don't know, I thought they'd been doing that for a while, but I guess it's still pretty new. I know they're talking about retina scans that can tell a whole lot more about your health than just your eye health because you can actually see inside your head, I guess, with a retina scan, and it can tell you a lot more about your vascular system and those types of things. And using AI on normal mammograms to predict the risk in the next 3 to 5 years has really had some significant breakthroughs, I guess, as well. Breast artery calcification helps to quantify the risk of heart disease. And of course, nothing is an island. Everything's connected, as we know. So it's funny that you wouldn't think a mammogram would be used for, helping to predict the risk of heart disease, but that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I agree. I thought some of those things were really interesting. And like you said, I, I'm glad he brought them up because I haven't seen as much about those things. I always gravitate to articles and information on the myths about a topic. I know I see those come up in it, 3 myths about something, and I always like to click on those. And he really did talk about some things that are not helpful, or at least don't have a lot of research to back them up. I know I think some of these things have been making the rounds on social media and with some influencers. So, one of them he talked about was stacking peptides. And I think one of the reasons this is getting noticed is that GLP-1, that's part of that Ozempic and Wegovy.
Oh,
It's actually a peptide.
yeah.
Um,
I
and
had
so I
never
think people
heard of stacking peptides ever.
no, but
I
it's
didn't know what
funny.
that
After
was.
I saw that, then I did start seeing it. You know
Okay,
how,
yeah.
yeah, once you hear something, then you're like, oh, I am seeing it.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so I think people started looking at some of the other peptides, But what he said is there's really not a lot of research on them, and there's certainly no human studies. And what's also concerning is that here in the US, there really aren't any regulations to ensure what they say is in them is actually in them. They often come from other countries and may not be sterile. And lastly, I guess they're really expensive. So I think that's one of those things that he was cautioning people to really think before you just start trying something.
Stacking your peptides. Wow.
Right, right,
Huh.
because,
Sounds like
like
a
I said,
supplement of some sort or that kind of
yeah,
thing.
definitely,
Wow.
and again, I always try to steer away from anything if it doesn't have a lot of research behind it because
Yeah.
you just don't know.
Sure. And, it's something your health is so critical. Well, I guess that leads right into the discussion on supplements that he had too. Huge amount of supplements. And again, they can be expensive and not regulated. He is not a big fan of supplements. Only some supplements that have extensive research on people, and I guess this is one area where talking with your doctor and doing some internet searches to find out how much information is out there to back up any claims about a supplement is important.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. I know I've talked with my doctor and she has me take a couple of things, but yeah.
It seems like D3 is pretty universally, I want to say approved. I mean, that's something
Right.
that we know, at least here in Ohio, we don't get enough sunlight. And it really makes a huge difference in so many parts of your body to have enough D3. So,
It does, and I agree, that seems to be one of the ones that there is quite a bit of research on. It's definitely one that I know my doctor wants me to be taking. But yeah, some of the other ones that, people talk about, I just really wonder, like, where are you getting your information from?
right.
And I know we talk on the podcast a lot about protein, but one of the things he brought up was that apparently a lot of people are talking about huge protein intake or the keto diet, and he really is not a fan. We can't store huge amounts of protein at any one time, and just like any other calories that you can't really store, they become extra calories, and it doesn't matter if they're protein or anything else. He said also, extra protein from animal sources can cause inflammation. So I think sticking to the RDA recommendations is a good place to start. I did look back, and in episode 181, Liz Plosser discussed amino acids, protein, and creatine. So that might be a good episode to go back and review to just understand some of the recommendations on how much protein you should get. And I know what I did was first I started tracking what I was getting regularly, and then I went from there because I did realize I wasn't getting quite as much as I wanted to. So then I made a kind of an effort to think about my diet, think about what I'm eating at each meal, and maybe for some snacks and seeing how I can add in a little bit more protein. But I didn't go crazy with huge amounts of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really a fine line. Like, people are like, you need to eat more protein. And it's like, well, not everybody needs to eat more protein. And what is more? Like, what is the RDA amount? And I know in Liz's episode, she recommended a lot, what I consider a lot of protein, but everyone's different. Like, you know, even like the creatine and some of those amino acids and the protein powder. If you have certain health conditions, like for instance, any kind of kidney problems, you want to be very careful about how much protein you take. So, you know, make sure you do your research before you just jump into different things.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, that's why I think it's good to just start even just simply just writing down what you're eating. I know there's lots of apps you can use, but you can even that's what I did. I just wrote it down on a piece of paper and then just started looking up the protein to see where I was and realized I was a little low. And so how can I make up for that? And just kind of be mindful that every day I'm getting a decent amount without going crazy about it.
Well, if you're doing a lot of resistance training, weight training, you want to make sure that you help your muscles grow, and that's an important thing too. Cutting out any one food group is pretty extreme. Well, anything extreme, I think you really have to check into. For instance, brought up about cold plunges, and I know a lot of people swear by them. And when I was doing a lot of running, I would try to sit in a bathtub with ice cubes to help my muscles kinda contract because it really did help with the what do you call that, DOMS. After you run a race or, you exercise for a long time or the next day you have a delayed onset of muscle what's the S? Uh, you know, you're sore. You're very sore. I guess it's muscle soreness. I know a cold bath will help with that, but a cold plunge where you jump all the way in and, like, it just seems like that's a lot. So he brought up cold plunges and how much they benefit us, but it can be a risk for someone with heart disease. And there's not a lot of evidence that brown fat improves health span. I guess cold plungers are supposed to improve brown fat, and I don't really know about that. But I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of things that he brought up that I don't really know a whole lot about. But I just thought that podcast episode was really interesting and worth listening to.
I thought the other thing that was really interesting that we brought up at the beginning was he and I think the other researchers went into this with one idea that it was really going to rely on your genetics.
Right.
And what they've discovered was that it really is about the choices you make, which is good and bad. The good part about it is it's in your control, but sifting through a lot of the information and trying to figure all of it out can be a little overwhelming. So I think sometimes it can be good to take one thing at a time.
Right, right,
The last thing he covered is also the healthcare system in the US. It's kind of fragmented, and I think other guests have talked about this too. It's really focused on treating symptoms, but not necessarily set up to promote the things that we've talked about, that lifestyle plus and all of those things that would help and that he's advocating for. And it does seem like in the last few years, there's been a distrust in the system, whether it's anti science, anti vaccines, and things like that, that really don't help when it comes to trying to figure all of this out. And sometimes it really kind of it does feel like you might be kind of on your own trying to figure this out.
right. Sometimes so much information is a disadvantage because you're overwhelmed with trying to learn all of that. I know just this podcast alone, it's been pretty short, but at the same time we have covered a lot of topics. So if you're listening and you have any thoughts on some of the different things that we just talked about, please share them with us.
Yes, you can leave us a message at becomingellie.com, or you can find us at Becoming Ellie on Facebook, Instagram, X, Pinterest, YouTube, and LinkedIn.
It was great talking with you today, Maria. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, this was really fun. I'm looking forward to the next episode of Fit Strong Women Over 50 podcast.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.